Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched Casablanca from 1942. Now, this is certainly on the list of possibly most famous films relative to the fact that I haven't watched them. Unfortunately, fame or infamy does not necessarily push a movie to the top of the list. If it did, there's probably 100 films I would have to watch before anything else could be watched. But this movie came up in passing, and I decided it was finally time to give it a watch. This is a pretty legendary film. If you care much about film at all, there's a good chance you've seen it, although obviously I'm an outlier, having spent so much time watching movies and yet not watched this one, and is generally considered to be one of the best made movies of all time. I am going to dispute that. It is very good. It is very, very good, especially for the time. However, as far as best movies ever made, it's not, I don't know, like it holds up. It holds up very well. But as far as the artistry and possibilities of cinema, it might not be that as high on the list as it is for some other people. For me, this is a fascinating film for a number of reasons. It is shot in like 1941, 1942, and was at the time right in the middle of a pivotal moment in world history, being both the midst of the Second World War and shortly on the heels of the American entrance into the Second World War. I'm not going to turn this episode into a huge history lesson, but it is extremely notable for the content of the film. The plot is very much about a very specific time and place, and being one that was so contemporary, like, obviously over the course of wars, especially world wars, a matter of months can make such a difference in like a public cultural and social consciousness. And for this to release so close to various events at that time is probably made it have a massively higher impact as a result. It is set in Casablanca, Morocco. It is set up at the very beginning of the film. They pretty explicitly just say like, oh, this is a movie about war and people trying to escape war and trying to escape oppression and so on and so forth. And I'm going to try not to spoil anything, but like, frankly, it's very good. Just go watch it. I'm not going to hold back too hard on this. I'm going to talk about some of the content, some of the characters, and there's going to be some spoilery content as a result. The movie is quite good on its own for mixing a bunch of genres that I don't think I've seen anything, certainly for this era and many decades forward, that mixed a bunch of different genres quite as nicely as this one does. This is it's a war movie, it's a romance, it's a comedy, it is a political drama or thriller, and it's, like I said, very specific to this particular time and place. It's also, in a lot of ways, kind of a propaganda film. Not so much as a lot of other films of the time. It's hard not to look at a lot of films coming out in the late 30s and through the 40s and even the 50s that were basically some version of propaganda about American exceptionalism and the American dream and all these other things, and talking about the recovery of the United States and the world economy, really, following the war. I'm going to really try and refrain from turning this into a history and economics lesson. This movie sits smack dab in the middle of an era where the United States is still economically struggling, but as party to or friends with the various allied nations, it is still engaged indirectly in the war, and it is coming out of the Great Depression. And this movie plays on that in a lot of different ways. This is a very diverse cast of characters, both in the actual casting, a little less in the actual casting, but in the actual casting, as well as who the players are in the writing. So you've got Americans, French, Moroccans, Germans, Czechs, I think Norwegians, all these people who are coming together in Casablanca, and the context being, trying to escape prosecution, or just generally not be in places where people are not welcome. This is both an allegory to the war itself. It's a direct reference to the political goings on and the persecution of various peoples. But it's also there's an interesting metaphorical side to the whole film that really permeates it very heavily, which is that the movie is, while it has individual characters who are representative of mentalities and character archetypes and things, there are also these various characters who are representative of whole countries and the mentality of nations, or at least a semi-propagandistic view of that. Like I said earlier, I still think this is somewhat of a propaganda film, but comparatively speaking, a lot of the things that from the 30s and 40s that would be called propaganda films are much more overt in their heroicness of their favored characters and the evilness of the opponents, and it is always pretty unsubtle. This, by comparison, really buries it and really highlights the gray areas of all kinds of people and all kinds of places. Now, by no means is it trying to show an unbiased hand. It is very clear that it is favorable to the Americans, the Allies, the people who are fighting for freedom, so on and so forth. And that's sort of a first layer of propaganda of just like the Americans and the French freedom fighters and so on are the good guys, and anybody who's helping them are the good guys. But there's also this idea of Rick as a character, as a representation of the United States and the United States' struggles from the end of the First World War into the Second. The economic woes, the struggles, the feelings of being unsure of what values the nation still holds, and economic uncertainties, who friends are, and the relationships between individuals and larger groups. And this is a really interesting analogy that could end up way too heavy-handed. But they take a rather, even if it's not that overt, and they take a rather deft touch to it. When you take a step back, it's sort of I don't know how to put this. The analogy is complex and all permeating. It's through the whole thing, but if you're not looking for it, it's not so overt that you'd just be like, oh yeah, he's just representing that thing. And so I think Rick is a really interesting character from the perspective of what does America look like in the 30s and coming out of the 30s and being unsure of what their place in the world is as the world goes to war against itself. Who are the right people to support? How do you engage in things you may not wholly believe in without sacrificing your own morals? And how do you do the difficult things that might be self-sacrificing, that might cause you harm, in order for the people who you care about to have better lives and be more successful and triumph over evil in a very overt sort of way. But that is all told through this sort of brilliant structure of parallel stories where all of these different individuals are coming together in Casablanca with their own motivations, with their own struggles, with their own interests, and nobody is without sin, to turn a phrase. Nobody is in wholly light or dark, and that's both literal and figurative, because the movie cinematography is overall really, really strong. I don't know the director, Michael Curtis, from anything else, and frankly, a lot of the cast, although I sort of recognize them, haven't seen them in too many different things aside from some of the main cast members. I'm getting off on a tangent. This movie is very complex and it's hard to talk about in a straight line, because you really want to jump around and talk about all these different things. All the characters are struggling with different things. Rick is struggling with current and former relationships. He's struggling with neutrality he's struggling with the difference between the neutrality of his bar and his own personal interests, his political beliefs, his beliefs in freedom, and his own history that we learn later in the film about having run guns and fought against fascism in Spain and all these other things that really say who he really is. But he's working in a context where he feels either disempowered or too cynical to do some of the same things he used to do. Meanwhile, he also has these people come into his life, some of whom he has to recontextualize and some of whom he hasn't seen in a long time, that make him rethink his past and rethink what his priorities are, and struggle with his own motivations and the things that may come up in that may come up for him that he may have buried. And so you end up with this sort of hodgepodge of different narratives that permeate it. Like I said, this really touches on a bunch of different genres all at the same time. So while there's this romantic, I hesitate to call it a subplot. I think there's no real A, B, and C plots in this film. They're all really strongly in parallel. The romantic plot serves to be sort of a backbone for the structure of the rest of the stories. Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman play the two romantic leads, and while this is often cited as a romantic drama, I think that is sort of doing in many ways doing the movie a disservice, in terms of talking about what it's really about. In a lot of ways, it actually structurally subverts the classic black and white romances that were made through the 30s through, let's say, the 60s, sort of where they tapered out. And spoilers for the next 10 seconds, they don't get together at the end because that's not what the movie is about. The movie is not about the two of them. It's about the two of them reuniting and remembering what their life was like and recontextualizing the experiences they had years ago, means about the world that they live in now and what their priorities are, and doing various acts of self-sacrifice in order, like either pragmatic or personal, in order to make the world better for others. The romance itself, I think, actually might be the weakest part of the film. It's not that the romance is not believable. It's more that it's the thing that, though it acts as the backbone for the structure of the film, it does not. It's not the. It doesn't tie in with the rest of the film as much. It ties the film together, but it is not the key that. It's not the key driver. The driver is really the tension of Casablanca and of Rick's bar, and all of these clashing beliefs, political beliefs, the nationalities, and the power dynamics of various people who are struggling, who are trying to escape persecution, and the people who have money, or the people who have the military might to exert their will on others. And this leads to really powerful characterization in a lot of different ways. While Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman play their roles extremely well, this is really an ensemble piece where everybody is key to. Everybody plays a part in sort of setting the tone of the entire narrative. Rick is both strikes a balance between having all of the agency in the movie and none at all, where the world revolves around and happens to him, and yet his power to react is moderated by other things, by his own feelings and his own beliefs, and his own worries, his own anxieties for himself and for the people he cares about. And various characters do an exemplary job of playing their parts in showing the stresses of this location as well as the world at the time. The threat of the Nazi invasion of France, the current occupation of substantial parts of France, the looming attacks on Britain, the movements in North Africa that are going back and forth between various Allied and Axis powers. So it's multi-layered in the geopolitical aspect. Meanwhile, you have other figures of authority who have power but maybe not agency. This French officer who is really has the power in Casablanca, but ultimately is so much of a pragmatist as to, as he says, go where the wind blows. And so in order to both try and follow his own beliefs, which are sort of hidden, but also placate the powers that are above him, while not coming off as a villain to the people who he is ostensibly serving. Balancing all of that is a really incredible performance in general. That character is played by Claude Rains, and he is, he's exemplary throughout the entire thing, as well as everybody else. There are some relatively minor characters who everybody sort of gets a scene of their own to show who they are and why they're important. characters as minor as the one of the bartenders, or all of these other things. Everybody is totally unique, and in a way that I have very rarely seen, especially in ways that I would say subvert archetype, but given the era this was made in, a lot of the archetypes are sort of not present or in the cinematic canon at that point. So they are written so well as to be totally unique, that they could not exist in a different time or place. And there are very few contexts in which you could write a story in which all of these characters were present and characterized the way they were, and have it not seem contrived. But everyone is incredibly natural. The individual character dynamics can be a little bit corny at times, I have to say. But really, if anything, that serves to strengthen the narrative that rather than weaken it. The way that characters interact are they can be very on the nose in terms of who their characters are in the narrative, but there is such an earnestness with which the corniness is played, that it is nothing if not it is nothing but believable, and that is a credit both to the script writers and to all of the actors who play all of these characters. I mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, but I think it's of particular note that this is a rather diverse cast, including Austrian and German expatriates who were, or I don't want to say expatriates. I don't like that term. Austrian and German actors who fled their respective countries in a few years prior, and having all of these different characters speaking a bunch of different languages, often which are not translated on screen deliberately to sort of, or I assume deliberately, in order to remind you of the melting pot that is Rix and that is Morocco and Casablanca. It's so unique and well presented and compelling as a location, that it can feel like you're just sort of wandering through sort of documentary style performance at times. And the movie has really excellent pacing too. And it is not slow. Man, I'm just talking about so many different things. It is not slow, which is definitely something I was worried about, and is often a place where some older films sort of fall short from a modern viewing, is that the pacing can be a little bit up and down, or just generally too slow for modern sensibilities. This, I think, while it does not keep like a great amount of tension all the time, keeps a good pace, so you always feel like something is moving or multiple things are moving. And because there are these multiple subplots and these multiple tensions happening at the same time, you can see it on characters' faces and in the way they act and the things they say, that they have a lot of preoccupations in their minds of like what the things are going on, what the various their various concerns are, and the things that they're thinking about that they aren't happening on screen. It's just like altogether a really, really solid and well put together set of performances. Ultimately, part of the reason I don't think it ends up being greatest film of all time material, at least not from a contemporary lens, is because it's a little bit too couched in the specific time and place and the specific cinematic language that has become I don't want to say less compelling, but less influential over time. While I said the cinematography is really good and I'm really appreciative of it, it is not the best of any of the things it does. It has aspects of sort of like noir and a lot of like German expressionism, and that really, both of those things really lend into how they use light and color and influence the costumes that various characters wear at different times. And as incredible as some of those scenes are, they are not the most artistically powerful at the thing that they are doing. So ultimately, I feel like the movie comes down to being a jack of all trades. And it is very good at a lot of things, but it is not incredible, I think, at any of them. I keep wanting to jump back and forth to different things I want to talk about, because I'm sure I could talk about this for probably an hour plus. And this is only on my first viewing. I'm sure it's a movie I will come back to again. Let me just rack my brain for a moment. I think for the time, this is a really incredible movie. And its impactfulness at the time that it came out would have been monumental, both in terms of being a social commentary and a political commentary, as well as exemplifying what the best of writing and acting and lighting and camera work can really do. While all maintaining an approachability that doesn't alienate the folks who are like not, cinema snobs. And it balances so many things so well that it deserves great recognition for that, undeniably. But ultimately, at the end, it just doesn't have the impact that I expect a greatest film of all time to have. It is absolutely iconic. It is absolutely impressive. And I think absolutely everyone should see it, because I think it blends so many different things that even if some part of it you don't find compelling, most of the rest of it you will. I'm going to refrain from spending too much more time meandering about thinking about it, and just say it's Casablanca. It's really good. I'm glad I finally watched it. I've been the Social Solipsist. Thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched, and I'll see you guys next time.